Welcome to Storm Tracker, your eye on the storm of your Carolina Hurricanes, and your home for the best insight and analysis to keep you totally informed on what's happening with the Canes. Whether it's the latest news on the ice or off the ice, we've got you covered. Now let's begin. Here's your host, Tom Ray.
Well, Carolina Hurricanes fans are abuzz after the Canes knocked out the Philadelphia Flyers in 4 straight games, the only team in this year's playoffs to win both of their first-round series in 4 straight. After dealing with the Sens and the Flyers in short order, the Canes have been resting, waiting to see who their opponent in the Eastern Conference Final would be. What contributed to the Canes' winning formula in their sweep of the Flyers? What areas of improvement can make a difference versus the Canadiens? How does Montreal disrupt the Canes' winning formula and make it a series? And what might we expect in the Western Conference Final? Joining me as always to discuss this and more, Storm Tracker hockey savants, Aaron and Katie. Ladies, lots to talk about.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Okay, so we wanted to kick it off and talk a little bit about the winning formula for the Canes. You know, winning 2 series in 4 straight is incredible. But there is a big story that has been talked about an awful lot with the media, and that's Freddie Andersen. Katie, thoughts on Fred?
Well, Freddie has just been absolutely spectacular. The Canes have provided their normal smothering system of defense, but we all know that chances do get through occasionally, and Freddie has been up to the task for sure. He has lived up to his nickname of the Great Dane. His numbers are absolutely sterling. It's, around a .950 save percentage, a 1.20 or something like that. Very close. Yeah. I mean, it's been fantastic. I don't think we've ever seen Freddie's level of play this high, which is to say something because he's had some good runs in the playoffs before, but nothing like this. And the great thing is because the Canes have provided him with enough run support, they haven't needed to go deep in any of their series, and he has gotten plenty of rest to stay fresh and be able to stay locked in. And so he has just been great. It's ice in the veins. That's what he is he's just calm, cool, collected back there in the net. Nothing seems to faze him. When there's a lot of chances going on around him, he is just that steady presence there, not fazed, not bothered at all by what's going on around him, even to the point where he's felt confident enough to go out and challenge some of the other players that are encroaching in his space and be very assertive in taking control of his crease. So it has been great to see how well he has backstopped the Canes, because if the team has confidence in their goaltender, they are going to play even stronger, even more hard-nosed and aggressive hockey, because they know that he has their back.
Well, for sure. And you know, he's played just 8 games in his last 39 days. So do we think Freddie's rested? You know, we think about some of the past years with the Canes where he carried a huge load. And for sure, as the series went deep, it was a lot for Fred. And I think this year is quite different in that regard. And there's the other story that I'm finding very intriguing as well, and that's the discussion about him changing his pad size. Now, this is interesting. He's gone to a smaller pad, and this is a lot of folks believe that he's much more nimble. He's much quicker moving side to side, and his Trip Tracy likes to call them the flipper pads, and he'll kick out those flippers. Well, he's definitely doing that. And I think the other point, and I heard Freddie on an interview with the NHL Network talking about he just feels really comfortable and confident right now. He's feeling great, and he feels it's kind of echoed in the team as well. So, he's a guy that, as we know, doesn't say a lot, but his actions are definitely speaking loudly these days. So great stuff for Mr. Andersen. So another one of the winning formula areas, of course, and you can't miss this one, is the Junkyard Dawgs, as they're so called now. Kind of fun stuff, I guess, with some interesting folks getting on board with that. Obviously, that's Taylor Hall, Logan Stankoven, and of course Jackson Blake. That great unit. And Aaron, why don't you talk about the Dogs?
Well, they've just been impressive every night. Logan Stankoven leads the Canes in goals, I believe, with 7, and he had 3 of them in this series against the Flyers. So cooled off just slightly, maybe, but no, not enough to make a difference. He's the 3 of them have contributed both at 5-on-5 and on the power play, which we're going to get to that eventually, but that's been important for the Canes as they get through this. Taylor Hall has been turning heads with his resurgence as a player. He has not looked this good in many years, and he's not been clearly as happy and having as much fun in his presence on that line as the veteran, and also the only one who can reach things from the top shelf. I'm kidding, but has been fantastic. Yeah. Listen, I'm 5'2". I'm allowed to make those jokes, but no, he's been fantastic as a solid presence beside the 2 young kids, because both Stankoven and Blake are very young. So kind of keeping them even keel and not letting them get too frustrated in those moments when they need a goal and they can't quite get one. So that's been helpful too. And then Jackson Blake has been, I think, kind of the unsung hero on that line. He hasn't had as many of those big flashy moments, perhaps, in terms of the goal scoring. But he has put up a lot of points in these 8 games, and he's been, a really big contributor to the way they create the offense, because he is a threat that other teams have to watch out for too, and that draws defenders away from Logan Stankoven. So altogether, they've put together a magic formula that seems to be working as well, through 2 series as it did in the very first game. So it's, the regular season chemistry they built up has carried over, and they haven't had any, lapses in play. So that's going to be a big key to how well they do against the Habs in this upcoming series. We're going to be watching that closely.
Katie, any thoughts on the Dogs?
I just love how they seem to be able to switch out with each other depending on the role needed. They can, I would say that Logan Stankoven is the net driver. He's the one that goes to the center of the ice and takes the play to the net. But if he's in the corner battling for a puck, then Blake or Hall is willing to take over that role in order to create the time and space needed for that trio with their defensive support to create opportunities and looks and to go hunt pucks and regain it. They all can shoot. They all have shown that because of the goals they've scored. They all can distribute. And so while we would perhaps assign them a particular role that they are most comfortable with or they most commonly fill, all of them can take on any of that role and support. And it's really been key, the adaptability of that line in order to maintain their success and their level of play. Even when they don't score, they tend to hem the other team in to their own end and create lots of looks, opportunities, get the goalie to freeze the puck in order to give the next line an opportunity to continue that pressure and get chances on net. So it hasn't just been the goals. And I think that's what's encouraging and going forward as far as continuing their success, is that it's not just about results, it's about their process and the way that they go about playing. And so the one thing I will be interested to see is how does Montreal try to match up against that line? Because the first 2 series, the matchup was more focused, I think, on Aho's line and limiting Aho's line. Right. But with the success of the Stankoven line does perhaps the focus then shift to neutralizing them and daring Aho's line to take advantage of that, to produce where they have not yet produced. So I will be very interested to see how that goes moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And, you look at, Taylor Hall, he's got 12 points. He's 10th in the NHL in scoring, which is great. And that's just in 8 games. So, of course, Logan's got 7 goals in 8 games, and Jackson Blake, he's only got 11 points in 8 games. So, I mean, interesting thing about Blake, he was a 4th rounder. There's no way that you could have, suggested that he'd be doing this at this stage of his career. And he's just lighting it up, something incredible. And the interesting thing was that when I watched him, when he was at North Dakota and he was playing in, like the Frozen Four pre-stuff and so on, I got to tell you, he was doing the same thing. He just controlled the puck on the ice. He was incredible, and he was dominant. So he's carried that over, and he's getting in the dirty areas just like Logan. And the other thing I like about the guys is that all 3 of them are playing heavy. Like they're all getting in and pushing and shoving and hitting, and and Eric Tulsky was talking about this. Somebody said, these guys are smaller, and how's that working? And he said, you can see it. They're out there making it happen. And I think that's a key part of it. Of course, Taylor Hall does a lot of that good work. So great line. They've been red hot for weeks. So I see no reason for them to cool off too much at this stage. So even if, to your point, Katie, Montreal starts to put certain people against them, I think they're still going to have pretty good success. So that's great. Okay. Another part of the winning formula for the Canes was the penalty kill. And what a story that's been. Eh? That's just been incredible. And you look at, where they sit right now, and they have 95% success rate. Aaron, what can you tell us about the PK?
Well, that's a pretty absurd success rate to have. I think they've only allowed 2 power play goals in the entire playoffs so far. And then you have to subtract one kind of in a way because they had a shorthanded goal against Philadelphia as well. So, that ends up being a net 0, for the other team in terms of how that works. We know what that's like. I think the Canes, unfortunately, have been on the other side of that before in the playoffs. So the fact that they are, able to succeed at that level against the Ottawa Senators power play and then the Philadelphia Flyers power play. I mean, these are not power plays that are maybe, the best in the league, but they certainly have some incredible shooters and some incredible scorers. And they, there was no way going in to expect that they would be this limited because the Canes PK was not that good in the regular season. A lot of that, of course, because of the long absence of Jakub Slavin. He's just one of the best penalty killers in the league. But True. Another one, and right now I think he's like the time on ice leader. Jordan Staal has been incredible on the penalty kill as well, just like he always has been in his career. I know that Keandre Miller has been filling, some of that role as well. So all of those guys are doing an incredible job, just unreal, shutting down the other team's power plays. They're going to have a different challenge, I think, with the Montreal power play, because just as Montreal, and I know we're going to get to talking about this a little more, but they do things a little differently on their power play. And I think that the Canes will certainly adjust because their PK is just so good. But it may take a little bit of figuring out right off the bat to see what the Habs are doing on their power play. So, but with 95% success rate, you can't help but think that they're going to get that taken care of. Well,
and within that number, of course, were several 5-on-3s. Mm-hmm. I mean, mm-hmm. they had a number of 5-on-3s, and again, the big 3 in my view. The heavy-duty guys doing it are Jordan Staal, Jakub Slavin, Keandre Miller doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Now, Jalen Chatfield did a wonderful job mm-hmm. as well, and, of course, Sean Walker. So those guys did the heavy lifting for the most part on the blue. And up front, you've got the usual suspects, of course. Aho's been in there with Seth Jarvis and Martinuk with Jordan Staal leading the way and others filling in as well. So that's a great story. And we'll talk a little bit about some strengths and concerns that we might have with Montreal coming on board as to how they might disrupt the Canes, and perhaps power play will be one of them. But a great story for the Canes on the PK. They've historically been near the top, right? So this is not a new thing. The number is kind of crazy, but yes. for them to be near the top is certainly what we would expect. And Tim Gleason does a marvelous job with the PK team. So it's great stuff. Okay. What about some areas that may help a little bit as they go forward into this series? What could we see maybe an improvement in that could make a difference? Katie, you want to kick it off?
Well, I alluded to it earlier, but I think that we need to see more from the Aho line. What they did defensively 5-on-5 was great. They really neutralized Ottawa and Philadelphia's top lines. And so the net result for that group is positive. But we're not in the first two rounds anymore. And your top line needs to be your top line, and they need to start contributing in other ways. Hopefully their defense remains strong. Hopefully they can keep up that particular level, but we need to see more production from them 5-on-5. We need to see them creating more looks, creating more chances, spending more time in the O-zone. And they have, so a lot of their underlying numbers suggest they are poised for a breakout, that they have had their looks, they have had their chances, and they just haven't gone. Kind of like how we talked about the Stankoven line during the regular season was seeing a lot of good downhill type play, and they just weren't getting weren't getting rewarded for it. Similar type underlying numbers are there for Aho, Jarvis, and Svechnikov. So I think they just need that one 5-on-5 goal together as a unit to feel good about themselves, to get into the groove, to get those vibes rolling, and then it can start going again, especially because I think there will be more counterpunch opportunities against the Canadiens than perhaps they saw against teams like the Senators or the Flyers. So that's really what I would like to see them improve on, is get it going from the top, get it rolling from the top with Aho's line.
Okay, that's interesting. You mentioned counterpunch. What are you thinking?
I just think, if you watched the Montreal and Buffalo series, it was a very up and down the ice kind of play style. It just seemed like Buffalo would get a chance at one end, and then Montreal would go back in the other end, and then Buffalo. Now, I don't think the Canes want to get into that kind of foot race. I think if that happens, they're letting the Canadiens dictate the pace. But because the Canadiens like to do that quick counterstrike, if the Canes can shut it down and regain possession of the puck, and they have players that are really good at delivering those passes out of the zone, whether it's Ghost or Miller or whomever, to break up the ice, you get it to Aho's group. They have the speed, they have the strength, they have the vision, they have the skill to on the rush create those looks, create those opportunities, and hopefully answer with a goal for the Canes. So that's what I would like to see, is a lot of those chances created. And then if they don't manage to bury it on the rush, they're good at recovering, cycling it around, getting that look, going for the next opportunity.
Well, Aho's currently 95th in scoring. So is Jarvis. They're tied with 4 points. Svechnikov's 115, and he's got 3 points. So, it can only get better. But something I was thinking about, Aaron, your thoughts on this one. Aho and Jarvis played in the Olympics. Jarvis has been nursing an injury. Do we think that the extra time off is going to benefit these guys?
Well, I think it can only help. I know that we've talked about Jarvis's situation before. It's that, shoulder injury that's been going on. He may end up being headed for an eventual decision about whether to have a surgery or not. So the rest in that is more just to keep it from being re-aggravated and not, it's not necessarily going to provide healing. But as far as everything else, they have to be, they played a lot of hockey this year already. So having 11 days off in between the second round and the Eastern Conference final, that's got to be helpful. And I'm sure it's helpful for Sebastian Aho as well, because while he certainly it doesn't have any kind of injury situation that we know of going on, and there hasn't appeared to be anything like that, he has had to focus very much on the heavy defensive side of things. It's just been his role in these playoffs, and they I think that is a little bit of a new thing in the sense that we're used to seeing Jordan Staal take all the heavy matchups, especially when the Canes are on home ice. And I think that the decision to put Nikolai Ehlers with the Stahl and Martinook line has led to them wanting to balance that time a little bit so that both lines will get their chances. And so that's, I feel like Aho has been taking more of those heavy defensive matchups than he probably has in the playoffs in the past. And that is, I'm sure that is the plan for him to continue to do that. So the extra time off, just a good chance to get your mind reset and to remember that, there is another side of the game, and that if you can get the offensive side going too, then that's only going to help the Canes, because they're going to get through this series. If they, as we assume that they will get through this series with a win, then they have another big test waiting for them at the end of it. So they're going to have to score. And I think that we're going to have to see some of that from this line.
Okay. So that group, a big part of the power play, and their struggles, in play on 5-on-5 is carried over to the power play as well. Katie, what are your thoughts about the power play?
Well, definitely have noticed the struggles that the Aho line has had on the power play, but I think that the actual issues stem less from them and more from Ghost. He has not been as effective on the power play as he was during the regular season. I don't know if it's just lingering effects from any injury issues he's had, or if he's in a funk, or what the issue is, but he doesn't seem quite as crisp and decisive with his passing as he has been, or when it comes to when to shoot versus when to pass. But he's just not the threat out there that he was in the regular season. And the Canes really need him to be that, because it creates more opportunities, more open looks for the forwards than to create and be dangerous on the power play. So, I don't think it's as much Aho's group. They've been working on it, but Ghost is, I think, the key. He's the linchpin with keeping the puck in the zone and quarterbacking that particular unit to be as dangerous as possible.
Well, I mean, we've seen some success with the Stankoven line on the second unit, which is great. But, we look back to the season from December 5th to the end of the year, the Canes were number one in the league at 30.3% success. I mean, that's incredible for that period of time. And they ended the season fourth overall at 24.5. So, when they get that power play going, and we saw it many, many, many times when when they're rolling, they are deadly. And yeah, you're right. Shane Gostisbehere, he's the guy that makes it all happen back there. He's the orchestrator of all that good stuff. There's no question. And he's just got to find his game again. But it actually takes me to another point, and I wanted to see what you might say on this, Aaron. The pair of Nikishin and Gostisbehere, I mean, they have a chance to be real difference makers. They were okay in the last two series, but we saw them at different points during the season really, really impactful. What are we thinking about with those two guys?
Well, I think you have to bear in mind that, both of them have had some injury situations. Ghost came back in, to begin the playoffs, having returned from some injury stuff. And then Nikishin had suffered a concussion against the Ottawa Senators. The time off in between the Senators series and the Flyers series certainly helped him with the recovery. But as anyone who has ever dealt with sports injuries, especially concussions, knows that just because you're able to come back and play does not mean you're 100% in terms of, your speed, your quickness, your decision making. And, there can be some lingering effects that wouldn't be enough for a concussion spotter to say you can't play, but can certainly impact your ability to be functioning at 100% on the ice. And we've known players that have gone through these repeatedly and have had, serious situations where they've had to sit out for a good chunk of time. I think of Philip Hedl in Vancouver.
Oh,
so,
God.
yeah. So you don't want that, and you definitely don't want, to put too much pressure on that pairing to do things that they maybe weren't ready to do. But with 11 days off again now between round 2 and round 3, I see no reason why Alex Nikishin won't be back to more than 100%, 110%. And so the same thing for Shane Gostisbehere. He's going to be raring to go. One thing that you noted, you were talking about the power play and as far as Svech Aho and Jarvis and their lack of ability to get things going on the power play. the Canes had 2 power play goals in the series against Philadelphia. Both of them came from Logan Stankoven.
Right.
And Shane Gostisbehere had 2 power play assists.
Correct.
So, he has been assisting on the power play, maybe during those line changes when he's still out there, or, perhaps in the first series, one of those might have come in the first series. But it's just not coming at the rate that we expect from him. He should be impacting that a lot more often. But you also have to note that the best penalty killer on every team is the goaltender, and the first goaltender they faced was Linus Ullmark, and the second goaltender they faced was Dan Vladar. Those are both goaltenders who are extremely good on the penalty kill. So you're not necessarily going to see a 25-30% rate against goaltenders like that.
No, I think those are good points. I mean, for sure, we're not expecting necessarily, and most teams are facing this, by the way. They're struggling on the power play. They're not scoring the number of goals they normally do. That's just playoff hockey, of course. But it's also the way that they're going about it, I think, has been the bigger concern. It just hasn't been smooth. They've been kind of disjointed, not getting good entries into the zone, whatever the case may be. And I think this time off also gives them some practice time. And we didn't talk about that, but practice time is something that is highly revered at this time of the year because they haven't had really any for months. So they can kind of work on some of those areas and tweak them a little bit, and I think it's going to help. But the other area that I wanted to kind of maybe bring up as an area that might help improve the situation for them in this next series, and that's face-off success. They've really been struggling in the face-off dot. Katie, any thoughts on that?
I mean, other than they've got to dig in, they got to do better. But I will give this to the Canes, though. It feels like situationally they did better on the face-off dot than perhaps the raw numbers would indicate, that when it came to an important defensive zone draw or an opportunity in the O zone to gain possession and create pressure, that they were better there at getting the face-off wins than the draws that would happen in the neutral zone, that sort of thing. Plus, I think I would hazard a guess that perhaps, and I know this is going to sound strange in a Rod Brindamore run crew, I wonder if they've de-emphasized that a little bit because their attitude is, we're so good that even if you win the draw, we're just going to go take the puck back away from you. We're just going to hound you into the corners. We're going to make if you do win the face-off draw, we're going to make sure it's messy and not clean so that we can pounce, we can outwork you, and it'll be just like we had won the draw to begin with because we'll come out of the scrum with the puck. Yes. There have been a lot of cases where the Canes have done that, whether it's Stahl losing a messy face-off and Martinook jumping in and grabbing the loose puck that's being batted around, or the fourth line has been doing that a lot. Jankowski is not the best face-off guy, but even when he loses it, you have guys like Carrier and Robinson that are ready to go to battle to pick up the puck. So I'm not particularly concerned about it. I think that the Canes have a plan A to win the face-off, and if plan A doesn't work out, they have plans B, C, and D to get to work and neutralize whatever that one face-off advantage might have given their opponents.
Well, the numbers are tough. They're sitting at 46.6%, which is 14th right now. This is lower than they normally are. So for sure, they're not on their game. And Sebastian Aho is the worst of them. He's sitting at 44.5%, and that's not good. Okay, and that's kind of this whole thing with that top line, right? If they can win some faceoffs and get control of the puck, it might help. But he's had trouble. In fact, talking about the gentleman you just mentioned who was getting help from his wingers, Carrier and Robinson, I wanted to segue to talk about Mark Jankowski for a minute. Jankowski actually leads the group in the faceoff dot in the playoffs at 50%. So it's not a huge number, but better than everybody else. So he is number one. But I wanted to say this about Mark, and of course we heard some news while the Canes were kind of chilling, and that was that Mark Jankowski had been signed to a 2-year extension. And they also had signed Charlie Serrato to a 3-year deal, which has started now. So he's got 2 more years after this year on the deal. What do we think about that? Aaron, what do you think about them signing Jankowski and locking up Charlie Serrato?
I think Serrato's going to be a fun guy to watch with the Chicago Wolves. I think it's going to be neat to see where he pans out. I think, I don't know if his ceiling is third line center or more realistically if it would be fourth line center, depending on as far as an NHL ceiling.
Yeah.
But I do think he has NHL potential. I think they saw that in him, and that was why they decided to draft an overager, because usually you don't do that in the second round. So, that's something that they saw something that they liked well enough to want to make this, player a member of the Carolina Hurricanes, and that's a really good thing for him. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does, and I fully expect that he'll spend all of next year in Chicago, and we'll see what happens with that. But and as far as Jankowski goes, I mean, I was telling you this. I mean, honestly, my honest opinion of Mark Jankowski is that he's a fine fourth line center, but he's a bit vanilla compared to some of the 4Cs in the league who are, Katie, you guys have one and that we used to have. Yeah. And there's guys like Luosterainen in Florida, and there's, some other guys whose names really come up, and you see what they bring and how much of an impact they have on the ice, in all situations and so on. Jankowski's, he's decent at faceoffs, but he's not a faceoff rock star. He's decent on the penalty kill, but he's not going to be on your first penalty kill unit most of the time. And that's, that's good enough. It's good enough. Yeah. And to sign him at a fairly reasonable contract rate so that if they decide that Serrato's ready earlier than we think, it's not going to be a big deal to move Mark off of the team or whatever they need to do. But, for the group certainly likes him, and I don't see that there's any reason why they wouldn't sign him. The reality for many teams this summer is that a lot of teams need centers, including bottom six centers. They need third line centers and fourth line centers. And there simply aren't any available. The UFA market is very, very thin. And even among teams it's not like teams have a stockpile of extra centers they're looking to trade. So that's something where getting Mark Jankowski locked up now makes sense.
Yeah, and they did this last year, as you recall, with Taylor Hall. So Eric, he makes a decision, and that's that, and gets it done. And really, the only players left that are not under contract will be Alex Nikishin, and we'll, I'm sure, have some conversations about what should happen with Alex in the summer. And, of course, the question about Freddie Andersen. He's definitely playing himself into another contract with the Canes as it's going right now. And if this continues, you can count on it that he's going to be re-upped and brought back. The Canes are in an enviable position. Their other two goalies are on very team-friendly deals, which means that even if they pay Freddie a little bit, they're still going to be cheaper than the number one goalie on virtually every team. So it's quite a story when you look at it from the financial side, for sure. But Jankowski, I like him. He's a good guy. He's very well spoken. We've heard a lot from him lately since he signed his contract, which is great. He's a team guy. He'll go and do anything for you. He's not going to necessarily excel at anything, but he's going to be just fine. And he seems to have something going on that fourth line. So it's good stuff. Charlie Serrato, been following him closely from his work at Penn State, of course, and really interested in what he's going to do. And I think he's a guy that's going to play with the Canes at some point. So, good stuff. Okay, so time to talk about this third round matchup. And I know, Aaron, you're going to be smiling from your two teams that you are so enamored with are both playing against each other. When we take a look at the lineups, we know the Canes are loaded. They've got their big line. We've got the Stahl line. We've got Stankoven line. So three very strong lines for the Hurricanes. Any of them can deliver offense. With the blue line, you've got the shutdown pair with Slavin and Chatfield. You've got K'Andre Miller and Walker. And, of course, you've got, as we talked about, Gostisbehere and Nikishin. So a very loaded group for the Canes. When we take a look at Montreal, you've got the big line. And boy, they were deadly this year. I mean, Suzuki had over 100 points. Caufield had 51 goals. So look out. Yeah. You've got Stavkovsky as well. So that's a heck of a line. And they are deadly, and particularly deadly on the power play. This second line has been the story of the playoffs, I think, with Jake Evans and Alex Newhook and, of course, Ivan Demidov. Newhook, he just scores big goals. I mean, for goodness sakes, right? And then you've got the Deneau line. Phil Deneau brought in because he's a savvy veteran and he's not going to hurt you defensively. With Josh Anderson, who's been playing great, and Texier. And then you've got a line that's been kind of interesting too through some parts of the playoffs, and that's the Bolduc, Veleno, and Doc line. And Bolduc scored again last night. So he's a guy that is paying dividends for these guys. The defense, not quite as deep as the Canes. Matheson with Carrier, Hutson with Dobson, and I know you'll talk about these guys as well, Aaron. And, of course, Jacky and Caden Gooley. So they're a very good team, loaded. And the goalies, you've got Dobes and you've got Freddie Andersen. So those are the lineups. I thought it'd be good just to set the tone on that regard. So let's start talking about what this Montreal team needs to do to disrupt the Canes and make it a series. And, of course, an area that you can always talk about is goaltending. Aaron, kick it off.
All right. Jakub Dobes has been a huge story in these playoffs for the young Habs team. He is a rookie. He's 24 years old. He has a fun personality. He's a lot of fun to listen to in interviews. He's just, he's a charming kid. But he's also just been very solid, very outstanding in these playoffs. He's got a .910 save percentage, which is not compared to Freddie's numbers. But I think you also have to look at the fact that this is not, like you say, the team defense is not the same as the Canes, and they did have the Tampa Bay Lightning as their first opponent. So, and then they followed by the very offensive-minded Buffalo Sabres. So, there's not going to be as much of that shut down the goaltenders just becoming the wall and doesn't allow anything. But he does have a certain amount of will and determination in these, close game scenarios and game changing scenarios where he does kind of seem to resemble that wall that you want. I think that for, what the Canes do, they're going to have to make sure that they get in on Dobes. They perimeter shots aren't going to go. Very rarely is he out of position on something like that. Shots from the slot have a chance if you're screening him. If you're not screening him, again, he's going to see it. He's going to stop it. So that is something that I know that we've talked about with the Canes in the past. Sometimes they seem to sit back a little bit and start shooting more from distance and just trying to get the puck through. And that doesn't seem to work as well with a goaltender like Dobes, so they're going to have to kind of get in his kitchen. Now, one thing that Katie pointed out with Freddie is Freddie was getting kind of aggressive about, getting people in his crease and getting them out. Dobes has been right there with that. So, if there's any after the whistle stuff, he's right there giving it back. He's been penalized probably more than any goaltender in these playoffs because, if he gets slashed, he'll just slash the person that did it back. And as much as that's fun, we don't really want him to keep taking penalties on the Habs side of things. So the Canes will have to be aware. But there again, I don't think the Canes are the kind to deliberately run goalies. They don't play that game. They don't, there might, you might occasionally have a player that just loses his footing or something, but they're not going to try to get in there and do anything injurious. So he's going to be a fun goalie to watch in this series. I think he's going to be, watching Freddie down at the other end and, learning as much as he can because again, he's a kid and he's going to want to learn from somebody who's doing it really, really well. So, But for the Canes, the key is going to be this is not a goaltender you're going to surprise with a shot. You're going to have to work to get these goals. So,
well, we recall the story of Cam Ward. Okay, so similar situation with the Canes when they won the Cup in 2006. So, I mean, it's again, goaltenders can change all the rules in the playoffs, and of course, Dobes has been outstanding. A lot of folks don't know much about Jakub Dobes. Where's he from? They know he's a Czech, but it's interesting because he's been in North America for a lengthy period. He actually played in the United States Hockey League, the USHL, with Omaha, a couple of years down there. Then he went to Ohio State and he played university hockey for a couple of years. So, he was kind of, obviously he was figuring out North America and getting his English in place and obviously growing his game. And then the last couple of years, he's kind of gone between Laval and, of course, the Canadiens. He's been outstanding. And you're right, Aaron, everything we're watching, I mean, this guy is so confident in that. He's a big presence. He's 6'4". He's a big guy. He plays big. The Canes will have to work hard with Dobes and net. Now, having said that, as we discussed earlier, I mean, Linus Ullmark and, of course, the Philadelphia guy as well, were outstanding. Both of those guys were tremendous in their series, right? So Vladar was just, again, rock solid. So the Canes figured out how to solve both of those guys, and you have to figure they're going to come up with some ways to solve Dobes as well. So great stuff. For sure, he can be a difference maker, and we're going to have to watch and see how that all plays out. So another area that the Habs have created some havoc and had some success with the power play. Katie, what are you thinking about with this Habs power play?
Well, they are definitely a group that will move the puck with pace, with speed. They'll play from below the goal line or from up top. And of course, Lane Hutson is one of the best power play QBs out there right now in the league. He is just oozing confidence on the man advantage.
Yeah.
But this is going to be where I think it's going to be one of the keys to the series is the Montreal power play is red hot and firing on all cylinders, finding lots of success. And the Canes PK, as we talked about earlier, has just been absolutely elite and dominant. So which one is going to win the day? And I think that the last thing the Canes want to do is to sit back and give this power play any time or space to work in, because they can create more and be more dangerous the more opportunities you give them. So the Canes need to double down on their zone entry pressure, on giving the Habs, especially Hudson, any time to be thinking while they have the puck and just make them act on instinct. I don't think that's a foolproof plan by any stretch of the imagination. The power play goal that they had last night in Game 7 was just pure beauty and instinct from Suzuki with that little backhand pass, finding the open guy. But so sometimes there's a good chance they can beat you. But the idea is to minimize the opportunities that the Canadiens have to beat them. And I think that's just playing to their identity, playing to their strengths as a PK unit. And I think that they will neutralize for the most part that particular threat from the Canadiens. But man, that power play from them is so good. And that has been, honestly, that has been where Caufield and company have been getting their points. They haven't been particularly strong at 5v5, but you put them on the power play and they come alive and they are sharks in the water for sure.
You know, another thing to notice is that, they have in 14 games, they have 13 power play goals. Where the Canes are currently at 13%, 13.5% on the power play in the playoffs. The Habs are at 25%. So the other key, and this has to be something that they have to have talked about, is the Canes need to stay disciplined and not take a lot of penalties, because like Katie said, the more opportunities you give the Habs on the power play, the more likely it is that they're going to make you pay for that. So not that I don't think that the Canes PK could stand up and do a lot of damage to their, power play unit, but I do think that, if the Canes are making repeated trips to the box for stupid stuff, and I mean, it's the playoffs. The refereeing has been what it always is. We never know, that sometimes a hook will be called where the couple of guys are battling in the corner and nobody really hooked anybody. And then other times they'll let something like a punch to the face go. And, so we don't really know what the standards of refereeing will be from game to game. We don't know how that's going to be in the series. But to the extent that they can minimize the amount of time they spend in the box, it's going to be imperative for them to do that. Because, this power play is not something you want to see on the ice a whole lot if you're a Canes fan. So,
no, for sure. And, I think the one thing to keep in mind with the numbers, Buffalo is not the best PK team. So I think there's there's definitely a difference there. No, it's going to be an interesting one. That grade A power play of the Canadiens up against, of course, this unbelievable PK of the Hurricanes. So that's going to be fun to watch.
It's immovable force and yep.
But no question, when you've got a trigger man like Cole Caufield, and you've got a setup guy like Ryan Suzuki or Nick Suzuki. I love Ryan because I think it's Wolf tonight they're playing. I can say that. Yes, of course, Nick, and for sure it's a good group. So this will be fun to watch, and again that could be critical because, as Katie was saying, the top line has really not done as well 5-on-5, similar to the Canes top line. Mm-hmm. And so if the Canes can shut them down with the PK and so on, that's going to really minimize what Montreal is going to be able to do from their big gunners. So that puts a lot more pressure on Alex Newhook to keep scoring those big goals. Anyway. Okay, one other area that I think we can maybe take a look at this stage to kind of contemplate how Montreal might disrupt the Hurricanes, and it's an area that I think is something we've talked a lot about with the Canadiens, youth and speed. And Aaron, why don't you kick that one off?
Well, it is a very young team. They're the youngest team in the playoffs, the second youngest, I believe, in the league. So for them to even be in the Eastern Conference Final right now, they are overperforming expectations all over the place. I mean, last year they were a wild card team, and that was a surprise because we didn't expect that. Those of us that have been watching and paying attention, I mean, I thought this would be the first year that they would make it into the playoffs, and they made it last year. And then this year, I thought, it'd be really nice if they could beat Tampa Bay. I wasn't 100% sure they could do it. But now they're looking at facing the Canes in the Eastern Conference Final. So they're running on something that goes beyond their skills and their stats and so on. There's a certain amount of momentum that these teams from Montreal seem to get every. Someone put it out there that Carolina wins in every metric, but you have to look at the fact that it seems like once every 5 year Montreal just goes on a crazy run, and it's it's true. It really is. It's like you don't understand where it's coming from, and you're just kind of there for the ride, and you're enjoying it as long as it'll go. But as far as, with these young players and some of the ones you want to keep an eye on, obviously we've touched on the top line, Slafkovsky, Suzuki, and Caufield. Caufield's impact in this playoff so far has been mostly on the power play, like you've said. Yeah. He did break through on the 5-on-5 goal not that long ago. And there's evidence to me that he is probably starting to heat up. Even though he did not record a goal last night, he had 5 shots on goal. That's more like his normal pace. He's not somebody who sits back and takes 1 or 2 shots on goal. So the fact that they were up to that point limiting that line's ability to get shots on goal was just an example of exactly what we're seeing with the Aho line, the 2 top lines canceling each other out, neither one getting the opportunities that they were getting. And really, you have to credit Lindy Ruff a little bit for the success that the Sabres had in Game 6, because it was tweaking those top lines and moving some of those players around that opened up the prospect of them scoring. And that is something I will say right now. We're looking at these lines. We have them, you have your chart from Puckpedia, but the lines have been fairly fluid. And, Martin St. Louis is not at all afraid to move pieces around. So they kind of have to at this stage, in their development. So, that second line of Newhook, Evans, and Demidov is kind of similar in a lot of ways to the impact of the Hall, Stankoven, and Blake line. Because Alex Newhook is actually tied with Logan Stankoven in goals. He's another one of those who has 7 goals. One of the interesting things about that, though, and this is something that, when you talk about momentum and players, get going forward, Newhook only had 1 goal against the Tampa Bay Lightning in that series. And we know what goal that was. It was the Game 7 overtime winner. Since then, he's produced 6 more. So he's also a player who seems to be heating up at this time in the playoffs. So, and alongside Ivan Demidov, Demidov has been an impactful player throughout the first two rounds in terms of his defensive impact. And I mean, and for him, he's not the most defensive guy, but he's been doing what he needs to do, following the system and doing, trying to limit the other side. But I would say the last 3 games, I have been sitting up and taking notice because he's gotten a lot more chances. He's gotten a lot more involved and he's starting to score goals. So if he's heating up, that's another player that they're going to have to watch out for, And then you've already talked about Hutson and what he's been able to do. It's just been a phenomenal story for the Habs to pick a defenseman at 62nd overall and get this kind of play 2 years into his career. It's unreal.
One of the things that we did see with the Canadiens, and we've seen it repeatedly, is maybe another area that we need to contemplate when we talk about disruptive possibilities for Montreal, and that's resilience. I mean, these guys don't ever seem to give up. I mean, Tampa, incredibly tough series, and they hung in there and won that in the opposing team's barn. They did the same thing with Buffalo. Katie, any thoughts on the resilience side with Montreal?
They certainly have been resilient and they've waited to get their chances, but it also, that puts a lot of wear and tear on a team and on players and stuff. And especially because as much talent as Montreal has, they do not have the depth that the Canes do. And I really expect the Canes to come out and just lean heavily on the Canadiens and just wear them down and wear them out and skate them around and around and around until they just don't have any more juice left in the tank. That game 7 the other night against Buffalo, Jakub only played 1 minute and 52 seconds. They were playing with 5 defensemen for the entire game. That is going to cost them eventually. Their fourth line played less than 10 minutes in that game, and it had overtime. That is going to cost them eventually. So yes, give them all the props, all the flowers for their resilience and getting to this place and where they're at. But it is going to take some kind of special magic for them to be able to outlast the Canes, not only because the Canes are rested, but because the Canes play a kind of style that is costly to work against when it comes to energy, when it comes to effort, when it comes to mental fortitude. I just think that the Canes have the Canadiens in a good place to try and break them early. I think game 1 is just going to be so key in not giving the Canadiens a chance to catch their breath after their 2 7-game series, that they need to lean on them heavily right out of the gate and just make life miserable on them. Because if they can get in their heads and they can not give them a chance to punch back, the Canes will put themselves in a really positive position to take this series.
Just one thing, Katie, on the what you noted with the fourth line and the third pairing. Arbor Jakub is primarily, the defenseman equivalent of someone like, Delorier. And I don't mean that as an insult at all. I just mean that, because he has played a lot in the regular season, and he does play a lot in the regular season. But in the playoffs, the frustrating part for Martin St. Louis is that if somebody's going to take a penalty, especially if it's going to be one of those reputation penalties where maybe nothing even happened, but we're going to call him for roughing, he's that guy. He is that guy. There's a debate going on among Habs fans right now about the other options that Martin St. Louis has for that third pair. He has Jaden Struble, who has played very well. He also has Adam Engstrom, who has had some interesting flashes, although he's quite young and hasn't done a lot yet, so I wouldn't expect to see him. No. But against the Canes, I wouldn't be surprised to see Struble drawn because, again, the Canes are not known as a, muck it up after the whistle. You've got to have your enforcer out there. They're not that kind of team. So I wouldn't be surprised if Struble comes in and if the third pair plays a relatively normal number of minutes at that point. And the same thing with last night. Oliver Kapanen drawing in was a surprise to a lot of us because Kapanen, he's a young guy, again, young Finnish player, not used to playing this many games, rookie, His energy has flagged down the stretch. He hasn't played a lot, and even in his minutes in the regular season were kind of declining. And then on top of that, after a couple of games against Tampa Bay, it became obvious that he was not up for that task. So he was replaced, and moved off of the into the press box for a while. He drew in primarily because Joe Veleno took a punch to the head, an elbow to the head, in Game 6 that didn't get called as a penalty, and even though the Habs said, well, he's fine, he doesn't need to rest, I think they made the decision to sit him out for that game. But Veleno has actually been more of a presence on that line, and honestly, Kirby Dach and Veleno have switched as far as which one of them is the center and which one of them is playing wing on that line. So they go back and forth depending on the game situation. So I don't think you're going to see your fourth line sitting out like they did against Buffalo. That was kind of a circumstantial thing. As long as Veleno's ready to go, they'll have him back in the lineup. So, and then, if not, I could see they do have a couple of other options that they could bring in. I think they were putting Kapanen in and then saying, no, this isn't working. So he's really not a fourth line guy. Kapanen isn't. So putting him there didn't really help them. So, but as far as their resilience goes, I mean, they're still here. They're still here. They're in the Eastern Conference Final. I do agree with you guys. I think that the Canes are going to beat them. I just don't think it's going to be quick. I don't think it's going to be 4 games. I don't think it's going to be 5 games. I think it's going to take more than that. And I think that it is this quality they have of being able to bounce back after the strangest things. And they have not lost 2 games in a row in the entire playoffs. They have not lost 2 games in a row going back into the regular season a little ways. So that's something about this group that, if the Canes want to crush them early, they need to beat them both games at the Lenovo Center, and they need to do it decisively. If they do that, then they flip the script and things are different. But we need them to do that, and we'll have to see how that goes.
Well, I was interested with Oliver Kapanen coming in. He's a 22-goal scorer, so I thought, boy, they're bringing more offense in here. But as you say, rightfully, he did not contribute at all.
Right.
And, you look at some of their big dogs, they set records for ice time in the last game, that game last night. So, people like Suzuki and
they were double shifting Suzuki, yeah.
Hutson and others played more than they've ever played. So, yeah, they were double shifting Suzuki, and that was a good, smart move. So, yeah. But it's going to take wear and tear, and we'll see, if it, in fact, affects the series as it goes along. These are long seasons. These are hard seasons. And so, we're going to see injuries. We're going to see players that are going to be kind of on their game and off their game. And we'll just see which team has the better situation and how it helps them through this series. I thought we'd take a couple of minutes and talk about what's going on out west. And I think that's very appropriate with Katie's interest, of course, in Colorado and what's going on with the Avalanche. And they took care of business, and here we go. Colorado, of course, is the juggernaut. Everybody thinks Colorado will win the Cup. They're loaded from front to back. I wanted to talk a little bit about Vegas, too. But first, Katie, what are your thoughts from the Colorado side in that series? What do you think? How's it going to go?
Colorado definitely seems to be well-positioned to take the series. They've got the best deepest center depth remaining between the 4 teams. It's hard to argue against that when you start at Nathan MacKinnon, go down to Brock Nelson, followed by Nazem Kadri, then bringing up with Jack Drury. And, oh, yeah, by the way, they also have Nicholas Waugh playing wing, who's a natural center. So if at any time you need a little extra help, you've got a 5th. So they are set up great on the forward core. The big matchup, of course, will be what is expected to be McKinnon versus Eichel, and how well they are able to deal with each other and keep the other one off of the score sheet. Whoever wins that battle gives their team a decided advantage in the series. And so that will be very interesting to see how the Avs handle that. In a lot of ways, the fact that they had to go against the Kings in the first round gives them a little bit of preparation for what Vegas is going to bring, because Vegas will play a very heavy game.
Yeah,
and
they do.
I think the Avs are willing to put up with that. They're not going to get frustrated if they're not going to be able to play wide open hockey. They'll be able to be patient and bide their time and wait for their chances. So I'm really excited to see what the Avs are able to do with the time off. It looks like they're getting a lot of their injured players back. The biggest question with injury has been in their defense with Cale Makar, and as well as some others like Sam Malinsky and Josh Manson. And so that's where the biggest question mark and the biggest weakness for Colorado comes in, is their top 6 defensemen are excellent. It is a fantastic decor, but as soon as one goes out, the guys that they have filling in for them are suspect at best. And you do start to get other guys double shifted and ice time minimized for the fill-in players, because they just don't have the backups that are nearly at the level that the Avs need them to be to play their system. So that will be key. Goaltending still looked a little bit shakier against Minnesota, but that's to be expected. Minnesota has more weapons than the Kings do, but hopefully Wedgwood and, if needed, Blackwood can bounce back and have a strong series. But I'm fully expecting the Avs to take this series, but it is going to be a battle. It is going to be a very heavy series.
Well, yeah, Vegas, of course, has been there before. You've got several players who've had, experience of going deep.
So has Colorado.
Of course they do. I'm not saying they don't, but I'm just saying, as opposed to some of the other teams they might have faced, certainly Anaheim and other guys. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So I think you look at one thing you did not mention with the Vegas Golden Knights has been the play of Mitch Marner. So yes, you've got Jack Eichel, who will match up against McKinnon, but Marner has been a difference maker. He's leading the league in scoring. He's been outstanding, and he's actually helped them create a second line that can score as well. So, the Avs are going to have to be mindful of that. Pavel Dorofeev is deadly on the power play, as you know. He led the league in goals on the power play this year. So they've got some guys that can hurt you. The other area that I think is worth discussion is goaltending. I think it's been a big shock to a lot of folks just how well Carter Hart has played. He's looked very, very good. And that's, part of this is John Tortorella. Sometimes you get these situations where somebody comes in and changes things a little bit, and all of a sudden the team goes for a run. And so I'm with you. I think Colorado's going to prevail, but I think it's going to be a tough series. I think it's going to be the toughest one for them so far. And I think, their situation on defense isn't a lot different than Vegas. Vegas has a couple of key defenders out as well. McNabb was sent out on a suspension, and Ozan was injured as well. So they're in the same situation in some case. But it's going to be a fun series. We'll be watching the Kane guys, Marty Natchez, and of course Brent Burns and Zach Drury and the rest of the crew. And so that'll be great. And you know what? It would be something amazing if Colorado faces Carolina in the finals. So we'll have to see. This is going to be great. So as we talk about closing thoughts, how do we think the time off is going to affect the Canes? I mean, there's a lot of folks that talk about rest versus rust. What do we think about that? And, what are our expectations? What are we thinking will happen? Aaron, you want to kick it off?
Sure. I think rest versus rust is one of those conversations you have every time. And, it just depends. If a team comes out flat after a long break, you say, well, it's too much rest. I don't think it's so much that as it is, how poised is any team after a long break to take advantage of the fact that they are healthy and well rested, as opposed to what kind of momentum the team that's been playing all along brings on the other side. Yeah. I really think that, we've seen the Canes do both. We've seen them come off of a long break and look like they kind of forgot how to hockey. And we've also seen them come after a long break and just be an absolute force and, show no mercy. It's the playoffs. It's the Eastern Conference Final. The coaching staff has been working hard to keep them in the moment. Strength and conditioning, we know what that's like with Billy, So I don't think there's any excuses or any reasons that the Canes shouldn't come out fully prepared to meet whatever onslaught the Habs try to throw at them in the first game. The Habs, of course, on their side, they know how important the first game is Not necessarily that they have to win it, but that they have to at least have that tone set of we're not just this easy team that you can steamroll over. It should be a great game, the first game. And I think it's going to be, it's going to answer that question within the first 5 minutes. We're not going to be wondering by the middle of the second period if the Canes are having any signs of rust. We're going to see it immediately or it isn't there. So I'm thinking that they'll be ready to go. I'm thinking that this long break, that the longer it's gone on, the more anxious they probably are to get back out there. So I don't expect anything like that. And as far as my expectations, I think I kind of alluded to that. I think the Canes will probably win the series, and I think that they will probably win it in 6 games, around that. You don't want to let the Habs take you to 7, I'll tell you. Because that starts getting very dangerous. That's not a strategy you want to repeat. But can they do it sooner than that? That's going to depend on a lot of things coming together and, working their way. And, and I mean, sure, could they get it done? And I mean, I don't think anyone expects a 3rd sweep in a row. That would be the most absurd thing to ever happen, and you might as well hand them the cup. Sorry, Katie, if that happens. Because I don't think that's ever happened in the modern era that a team has swept, 3 rounds. And since they've gone to 3 rounds, they haven't, or 4 rounds, they haven't done it. So, but I also think that it's going to be a fun series. I think it's going to be hard fought on both sides. I think there's going to be a lot of great moments to watch for on both sides. And I think it's going to be entertaining, which is something that you cannot say of every series that was in the second round. There were some series that just weren't very entertaining to watch. This is going to be fun.
I agree.
And not just for me.
No, it should be a great series. Katie, what are you thinking?
I'm much more optimistic. I think the Habs are just going to be too tired. I really do. Despite all the youthfulness, despite all the energy, I think the Canes are just going to wear them down and wear them out and end up taking this series. I think I'm going to go with Canes in 5, although, man, I want to predict another sweep. I'm really tempted to predict another sweep because if the Canes can take those first 2 games, I just think that they can take the wind out of the sails and turn the Canadiens a little desperate, and they just don't have the playoff experience to adapt as well as perhaps they would need to in order to deal with the Canes' pressure. But they have been a resilient team. They have had some times where they have taken a big onslaught like they did in Game 7, where the Sabres turned the tide and they came back and they tied the game and they were beating and beating and beating at the doors of the Canadiens, and the Canadiens withstood and were able to hang on and get that overtime win. So it is not outside the realm of possibility that the Canadiens could find that in a game somewhere. So I will say Canes in 5, although I really want to say Canes in 4 because I think that Montreal is ready to I think they're just tired. I think they've been beat on so much between the Lightning and the Sabres that the Canes will just take it to another level, and they'll just get into their heads, and their skates will just be a little bit slower to be able to try and match what the Canes are going to throw at them. Sorry, Aaron.
That's okay. I mean, I think that it's entirely possible. I wouldn't say that it's likely, but I just think that the way they looked in Game 7 and even in Game 6, Game 6 was strange. That was a game where they just didn't play their game at all. It was like they showed up and decided to take the night off. But Game 7, I think that looking tired had a lot to do with, again, like you said, double shifting Suzuki and all of the things that they were doing. And yeah, they're going to continue to be tired from that. But these guys Suzuki's 26 years old, and he's one of the older players on the team. So I don't know that you can rule out that burst of adrenaline that comes in when they, hit the ice and realize they're playing in the Eastern Conference Final. I don't think they're going to be quite as easy to knock out as the Flyers were. And, the Senators wouldn't have been easy if they had been healthy, I think. So we'll see.
Well, it's interesting. The Canes have played 8 games. Montreal's played 14. So if there's any, kind of sense that playing extra games is going to have some impact on whether you can continue to do things at a high level, we'll see. But, a lot of the folks, pundits right now, feel that this is the best team that they've seen under Rod Brindamore's guidance. In fact, Eric Tulsky feels that very strongly. And, you look at the team, 7 forwards with more than 20 goals. You had 13 players who had over 11 goals. I mean, both of those are the top in the NHL. The Canes can really pour it on when they get going. And they've been doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the back of one line so far. So, they've got depth. They're going to find their way. So it's going to be interesting to see how Montreal handles, this onslaught from the Canes. And we saw it in both series. We heard the broadcaster saying, they just keep coming at you. They just keep coming. They're always, it doesn't matter who's on the ice. They're coming at you hard. Well, that's the way they play, right? So,
this is going to be a matchup between the Canes adjective, the word that they use to describe the Canes is relentless.
Yes.
So relentlessness versus resilience. And that's what we're going to have to see. Which one is going to be the one to prevail? I think that the relentlessness will prevail ultimately, but I don't think it's going to be easy.
Well, there's one other thing we haven't talked about, and that's the coaches. Okay, so Rod Brind'Amour is a veteran coach. He's been through it many, many times. And yeah, I think Martin St. Louis is a great coach, but it's early days for him. So I think this will be an interesting matchup as well. I just wanted to end with this. One player on the Canes, who's going to be the player to watch in this series? Aaron?
In this series, I think the player to watch will be Sebastian Aho because he has to find his way. A lot of what we're talking about with the Canes, what they can do and how they can do it, depends on that top line finding their game. And that line runs through Aho, so he's got to be the one to start it off. If Sebastian Aho starts scoring at 5-on-5, then Katie may be right, and there will be a very quick end to this series. But he has to do it, so he's the one I'm watching.
Okay. Katie, who you got?
I have Shane Goss to spare. We know what Hutson brings. Okay. We know the kind of dynamic play that he brings from the blue line and the kind of cheat code he can be, and the Canes need to answer with that in Ghost. They need Ghost to bounce back to his top form that he had in the regular season and really be an effective member of their blue line, both 5-on-5 and on the power play.
Yeah, I'm going to pick Andrei Svechnikov. I think he's been knocking on the door, and I think he's about ready to break out. So, yeah, I had Goss to spare last time. That didn't work out so well. So good luck for you. Okay. Just to end this part of the discussion on the matchup, Daily Faceoff have 9 folks who decided to make their picks for the 2 series. And they decided that Carolina would win the series quite handily. There was only one of 9 that suggested Montreal would win the series, and that was Tyler Yaremchuk. And the same thing with Colorado would win them all. Like every one of them thought that Colorado was going to win the series. So kind of interesting to see how the pundits are looking at it. The general feeling is that this is the year for the Canes to get to the Stanley Cup Finals. I mean, I don't think we're seeing many people say anything different. If Montreal does an upset, it's going to be quite a story. So
we don't want to see that story. I know.
It's been done before, so you can't sit here and say never on anything like this. If Jakub Dobes, continues his outstanding play, and the top line gets hot for Montreal, all of a sudden the rules change. It doesn't take a lot of scoring to win these games, as we found out last night. They're pushing and shoving all night, and it ends up 3-2. Like these are tough games. And so a little bit of offense can go a long way. So anyway, lots of fun talking about it. We're going to follow this very, very closely, of course, and we'll keep an eye on the other series as well, Katie, to see what's going on with the Avalanche and Vegas. And I also want to say this, that for all the folks out there who are mindful of what's going on with the Chicago Wolves, that I'm all over that one too, because the Wolves are just crafting quite a story. And they have a chance tonight to knock off the Grand Rapids Griffins and move on to the next round. So it's kind of exciting with both the Canes and the Wolves doing very, very well. In any case, ladies, great to talk about this. Doesn't get more fun than talking about the third round of the playoffs and our favorite teams doing extremely well. So it's good. For those of you who have been watching or listening, of course, we're very, very pleased you spent time with us. If you like this episode, please press the like button. If you have any questions or comment, please put those in the comment section. And of course, if you want to be alerted of future episodes of Storm Tracker, please press the subscribe and the bell buttons, and we'll alert you just as soon as they're available. As always, we thank you so much for spending time with us and look forward to getting together with you real soon, right here on Storm Tracker.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends for everything with the Canes. You need Storm Tracker.